China has revealed a cargo ship unlike anything on the oceans today. 4 football fields long, nuclear-powered, capable of sailing for decades without refueling. A vessel that can move 14,000 containers across the world in a single voyage. And its impact could reshape global trade and the balance of power. Picture a vessel longer than 3 city blocks and capable of carrying cargo that would fill 7,000 trucks. Now imagine it crossing the Pacific Ocean without stopping for fuel. Not for years, but potentially for multiple years straight. China's State Shipbuilding Corporation has released the full technical specifications. The numbers are enormous. The ship stretches around 400 meters, longer than the Empire State Building laid on its side. It carries 14,000 20-foot containers, equal to 280 million pounds of cargo, the weight of around 2,000 blue whales. Deep inside the hull sits the technology that makes this possible. A thorium-based molten salt reactor. No diesel engine, no massive fuel tanks, no exhaust funnels pumping smoke into the sky. Roughly 90% of the products people use every day travel on cargo ships. Phones, furniture, food, all move through global shipping routes. Traditional cargo ships burn some of the dirtiest fuel on Earth. A single large vessel consumes about 150 tons of fuel per day, roughly 200,000 litres, contributing to nearly 3% of global carbon emissions, more than the entire nation of Germany. Fuel costs can represent 60% of a shipping company's operating expenses. When oil prices rise, global trade feels the impact. A nuclear-powered cargo ship with decades of endurance changes energy costs, emissions, and strategic logistics in one move. This ship uses a completely different form of nuclear power from submarines or aircraft carriers. Those rely on enriched uranium. The Chinese design uses thorium, a slightly radioactive metal that is about 3 times more abundant than uranium and found across China, India, and Australia. Thorium itself is not the fuel. When exposed to neutrons, it becomes uranium-233, which powers the reactor. The conversion and fission take place inside a molten salt reactor, where the fuel is mixed into liquid fluoride salt instead of packed into solid rods. The salt runs at around 700 degrees Celsius, carrying heat through the reactor loop. That heat produces steam. Steam powers turbines. The turbines generate electricity, and the electricity drives the ship's massive electric motors. The entire reactor module is roughly the size of a single shipping container, a fraction of the space taken up by the enormous diesel engines used on conventional vessels. Civilian nuclear-powered ships stayed theoretical for decades because of one issue: uranium. Most nations lack large uranium reserves and must import it from suppliers like Kazakhstan, Canada, and Australia. Any country trying to build a fleet of nuclear vessels would depend on foreign uranium, a vulnerability no major power accepts lightly. China faced the same challenge. It produces only about 3% of global uranium and relies heavily on imports from Kazakhstan and Russia. Thorium changes that equation. China has an estimated 280,000 tons of thorium, one of the largest reserves in the world, enough to power reactors for centuries. The obstacle was fuel conversion. Thorium must be transformed into uranium-233 before it can power a reactor, and this process has never been demonstrated at commercial scale. That changed in 2024. Researchers at the Shanghai Institute of Applied Physics successfully bred uranium-233 from thorium inside a molten salt reactor. This happened inside a 2-megawatt experimental reactor operating in the Gobi Desert. The breakthrough proved that thorium to U-233 fuel cycles work in real reactors. The implications are enormous. China can now make its own nuclear fuel. It can extract thorium from domestic mines, convert it into breeder reactors, and power vessels without importing uranium from anyone. This creates true energy independence at sea. Fuel is the largest expense in container shipping. A typical cargo vessel burns enough marine diesel to spend $50 to $80 million on fuel over its lifetime, and that number swings wildly with oil prices. A thorium-powered ship rewrites that math. The reactor core is loaded once, possibly twice, during the vessel's entire 25-year service life. Fuel costs become predictable. The fuel itself is cheaper than refined marine diesel. And nuclear propulsion eliminates almost all emissions. Shipping companies see an enormous cost advantage. Fuel volatility disappears. Emissions drop to near zero. Long-haul routes become cheaper and more flexible. And China holds a major manufacturing advantage. The country controls roughly 40% of global shipbuilding capacity, more than the rest of the world combined. If China chooses to mass-produce nuclear cargo ships, it can scale the industry faster than any competitor. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. China's navy is already the largest in the world by number of ships, but most of those vessels are diesel-powered. They need to refuel every few thousand miles. That limits their range. It means they need supply ships following them around. It means they can't project power too far from Chinese ports. Nuclear propulsion changes that calculus completely. The United States has been running nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and submarines for 70 years. Those vessels can operate for decades without refueling. They can stay at sea indefinitely. They go wherever they want, whenever they want. China has exactly one nuclear-powered icebreaker under construction right now. And that's what has defense analysts in Washington paying very close attention. Here's where this gets even more interesting. China's Belt and Road Initiative has built ports in over 60 countries: Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Greece, Djibouti, Tanzania. Many of these ports were financed with Chinese loans, built by Chinese companies, and increasingly they're serviced by Chinese ships. Now imagine those ships never need to refuel. They can run continuous trade routes from Shanghai to Athens without stopping. They bypass the Suez Canal if they want. They don't need bunkering stations in Singapore or the Persian Gulf. It makes China less dependent on traditional maritime choke points. The Strait of Hormuz, the Malacca Strait. These passages handle trillions of dollars in trade every year, and they can be blockaded. Nuclear-powered ships reduce that vulnerability. Obviously, the big question everyone asks: what happens if one of these ships sinks? Fair concern. When the Soviet Union tried nuclear-powered cargo ships in the 1970s, they built exactly one, the Sevmorput. It's still operating today, mostly hauling cargo in the Arctic, but it never caught on. Too expensive, too complicated, too much international worry about nuclear material floating around the oceans. China's approach is different. Molten salt reactors are inherently safer than traditional nuclear reactors. If the system overheats, the salt drains into a passively cooled containment vessel. The reaction stops automatically. No meltdown, no Chernobyl scenario. And because the fuel is liquid instead of solid rods, the risk is far more limited. Even in a breach scenario, the salt would simply cool and solidify into inert rock rather than spilling radioactive material. Still, international maritime law is going to have a lot of catching up to do. Right now, nuclear-powered civilian ships need special permissions to enter most ports. They're considered too risky. China's betting that economics will override those concerns. If their nuclear cargo ships are approximately 30% cheaper to operate, port cities are going to reconsider their regulations fast. Chinese state media has suggested plans for multiple nuclear-powered cargo ships by 2030. As of now, it's still a proof of concept. If these vessels deliver on lower costs, zero emissions, and long-range endurance, the global shipping industry will take notice. The major players, Maersk, MSC, CMA, CGM, move nearly 20% of global trade, and every one of them is watching what China does next. Shipping operates on razor-thin margins. A 5% cost reduction is transformative. 30% reduction forces a complete industry redesign. If China builds nuclear cargo ships that are cheaper to operate than conventional vessels, every major shipping line faces a choice: adapt or fall behind. Other nations are exploring similar paths. South Korea is researching molten salt reactors for maritime use. Russia continues expanding its nuclear icebreaker fleet. US defense contractors are studying small modular reactors for naval operations. China holds the earliest advantage. For more than a decade, its researchers have worked on molten salt reactors. China built the first commercial thorium reactor prototype, developed the supply chain for uranium-233, and is now integrating these technologies into the world's most ambitious cargo ship project. This entire effort demonstrates technological leadership, the ability to build systems other countries are still debating. Why does this matter for anyone following global trends? Because global shipping influences nearly everything: the price of goods, the speed of delivery, the stability of supply chains, and the environmental footprint of global trade. If nuclear cargo ships become widely adopted, operating costs drop, and shipping becomes faster and cleaner, emissions fall dramatically, and the nation controlling the technology gains enormous leverage. Countries wanting nuclear vessels will need access to reactor designs, fuel cycles, safety systems, and regulatory frameworks. Some will buy Chinese ships, others will license Chinese technology, and many will spend years trying to build alternatives. China is constructing the infrastructure of a future economy, an economy where long-distance shipping is cleaner, cheaper, and less vulnerable to fuel volatility. This shift carries real weight. Global shipping moves about 11 billion tons of cargo annually. If even 10% of that transitions to nuclear propulsion, the world eliminates around 100 million tons of CO2 emissions per year, equal to removing 20 million cars from the road permanently. Shipping accounts for roughly 80% of global trade by volume, so any technology that lowers operational costs reshapes economic power worldwide. China is redefining what commercial shipping looks like, and the consequences will ripple through every industry connected to global trade. Here's the question experts worry about most. If China can power a cargo ship with a thorium reactor, what else can run on this technology? Remote industrial zones, forward military bases, even off-grid cities. Thorium reactors are compact, stable, and scalable. They don't require huge cooling towers or coastal water sources. A unit can sit in the middle of a desert and operate for decades with minimal intervention. And China has now shown the system works on one of the harshest platforms imaginable, a ship exposed to storms, salt water, vibration, and constant motion. If a reactor performs reliably there, it can perform almost anywhere. The real question isn't whether this ship reshapes global shipping. It marks the start of a wider energy shift, one where China holds the technology, the fuel cycle, and the production capacity. And that shift isn't on the horizon. It has already begun. If you think a nuclear-powered cargo giant is bold, wait until you see what China is trying to build beneath the ocean floor. A tunnel so deep and so long that engineers once called it impossible. Click watch next to see that video. Thanks for watching.